Good afternoon, and it's been a rough day for the Irish girls in the torrential weather in Perth as they have been unfortunately seeing their World Cup dreams come to an end. It was a fantastic performance, probably one of the best 45 minutes, at least in the opening half, but overall, probably one of the best 90-minute performances we've seen from an Irish side in recent years, in my memory at least. We might hear a different from Aaron in a couple of moments, but really impressed with the opening start. Katie McCabe with a goal from direct from a corner in the opening minutes, and then a goal in injury time in the first half and early in the second half put paid Ireland's hopes. But Aaron Clarke from the stadium in Perth, first of all, welcome. Unfortunately, it's not in better conditions or better circumstances than we might have hoped for.
No, disappointed. Probably the overall emotion is proud of the Irish team, proud of what they, how far we've come. Like I always still hark back to 2017 to what was changing in dressing in airport toilets and tracksuits and stuff like that. They've been in a major tournament. Katie McCabe started giving us a dream start. What more could you ask for? Talked a little bit after the game. She did to the media about how they targeted the set plays. Like you could see the goalkeeper, she was too far off her line, and Katie seeing that, and a bit of wind and rain helped. And what a start. You go into that, you sort of think, okay, lovely, Ireland are on top, playing a little bit of a different way, a little bit more attacking, something we sort of spoke about that they needed to do. And everything was rosy. Probably, if you had to say anything, you're probably a little bit disappointed that Ireland weren't maybe 2-0 up before the Canadian goal. Kira Caruso had a great chance. There's a couple of other efforts that we didn't really get on target, and when we had them under pressure, we just didn't capitalise that. But I agree with what you said, though. Probably one of the best 45 minutes in a long time. It's right up there with the French first 42 minutes against France. But as Tony Gustafsson, the manager of Australia, said in the opening game in the press conference before the game, Ireland are vulnerable just before the break, and that's what it was. It was a Nifahi got turned way too easy. The cross come in and come off Megan Connolly's foot. Disappointed for Megan. She couldn't really do anything, to be honest with you. And it was one of them that when it goes in, it's a hand and heart moment. And right on the stroke of half time, I disagree with you a little bit in terms of the second half. I thought Ireland went great in the second half. I thought they lacked that little bit of composure. It was at times it was nearly as if Katie McCabe was trying to carry Ireland.
It's
they
funny.
Just didn't have that.
It's funny. I watched the game with a few friends, and I have had the pleasure of watching Katie in a similar circumstance a long time ago. She played in the under-16 FAI Cup final for St. Francis back in the day. Not a lot of people might know this, but they were beaten 2-0. I said I was the manager of the team. We were beaten 2-0 by Colga back in the day. 1-0 down after 2 or 3 minutes, and Katie essentially went on an 85 minute effort to try and do exactly what we saw from her in stages today. And she ran through the team, just couldn't find the back of the net, probably had 20 odd chances and hitting from everywhere. And despite what we tell her, she was single-mindedly going for goal. I saw that coming out in her again today. And mind you, if either one of those chances, and the two I'm talking about in particular, go in, they've been written about in every single sports newspaper in the world tomorrow morning, particularly the one where she ended up slaloming into the corner, looked like she was going into a blind alley and just cuts back between the two, gets around another 2 or 3 Canadian players, and then an outstretched foot turns around the post. But what a talent. She was definitely by far and away the standout player on the field for both teams for the 90 minutes, never mind just the 45 in the first half. And I thought she was exceptional. I thought all the talk in the build-up about the likes of Jessie Fleming coming back, I thought Katie Taylor was head and shoulders above everybody on the pitch. Not Katie Taylor, Katie McCabe.
Yeah, you're not going to hear me disagree. Fully deserved the player of the match as well. And she sort of talked to us post-match about that effort, and she said she just didn't get enough whip on it. She was extremely emotional post-game, and I don't blame her. Courtney Brosnan was also extremely emotional speaking to her, and you could see how much it meant to her. And she started talking about how Ireland need to sort of kick on from it as well and stuff like that, which I fully agree. Like the goal itself, it's a tough one to take. If it's a dry condition, does it happen? Maybe not. But as you mentioned at the start of the show, the wind and rain, it never stopped. It was even that bad that at times we had to half close the laptops in the press box because the rain was sort of coming in. I just felt like I was really, really happy that first half. I thought they were really, really good. Second half, I just didn't think we came out at half time. I thought the substitutes didn't really work for me. Too many times we just passed the ball and touch. The throw-ins were just being given away. Sloppy little things and things like that, where it was France-esque second half all over. It was nearly a carbon copy of the French game for me. And I hate to say it, but it looked as though in the second half, if any team were going to score, it was going to be Canada.
Yeah.
And
We had that inevitability about it. Talk to me a little bit. Maybe you talk about the halftime substitutions. I want to get to that, but before we do, let's go back a couple of days. I want to talk about strategy throughout the last few days. Obviously, Louise Quinn came into the game with an injury. It was kind of noticeable in places where she just wasn't quite 100%. She'll still give you a solid performance. Normally, in normal conditions, at 70 or 80% fit, but it's a World Cup game against the Olympic champions. You need to be 100% on your game. Heather Payne, injured in the build-up, a lot of talk, presumed fit to play, broke down in the warm-up. Those two players in particular, your thoughts on whether they should have kind of had a plan B coming into the game for either one of those, or are you happy that both were in the plans in the build-up?
It's difficult because the Heather Payne one, I'll start with Heather. The Heather one sort of didn't really come about until after the press conference. When they went to training, the reports were like, oh, Heather's massively strapped up. There was no wind of this beforehand, so we didn't really have any understanding that Heather was carrying any sort of a knock. There was nothing said by Vera, nothing said by the FAI. The only one we sort of knew about was Louise. So when we see that, and then she trains last night, sort of gingerly a little bit, you were sort of a bit concerned. And then when she's announced to start, you're thinking, okay, she must be okay. But you could sort of see in the warm up, I don't think RTE would have showed it, where when it happened, Vera is sort of running to Tom Elms, running to Jan van William, back to Tom Elms. Then she eventually goes to Anya O'Gorman to give her the news, and sort of you could see Anya.
It did show elements of that, and it was very visible that Heather wasn't going to take a part in, and she wasn't that happy about it. Like, she was visibly distressed on the sideline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was crying, and it's a massive opportunity for Heather. It's a massive chance, and you know, to miss a game like that, you'd be absolutely devastated. But the right call. The only question you'd ask is, should it potentially have been done pre-game, that it wasn't, the decision was taken out of her hands if she wasn't fully fit. Likewise, you could see Louise was carrying a bit of a knock, and it's difficult because you have to have fully fit players going into these sort of games, and it was a risk. I don't think the Louise one backfired, but I do think it was definitely evident, and it's difficult because, you know, Ireland are out of World Cup. It's to say, if a Diane Caldwell or a Claire O'Riordan had played, would it have changed anything? I wouldn't be confident it would have changed anything.
Do you think that potentially, with the injury just affecting her slightly, and only slightly, I think in terms of her personal performance, I don't think we could fault her for the 90 minutes. But in terms of, well, until she went up front, and then that's a whole different discussion we'll have in a few moments. But in terms of her role, her standard role at centre back, we looked a bit disjointed, particularly in that stage where we conceded each of the goals. The first 20 minutes of the second half and the last maybe 10 plus injury time of the first half, we just didn't look organised at the back. It just seemed to be not quite on point, as we always are. Could the injury have been a factor or not?
Look at the second goal in particular. She got between Campbell, I think it was Connolly and Fahy, too easily. And despite McCabe's best efforts, she just couldn't get a foot to it. And, like, it was a lovely ball. It was a lovely ball played, but I do get where you're coming from, especially if you look at the first goal in particular. It was preventable, and I think that's the problem with Ireland. Would a fully fit Louise Quinn have changed anything? I don't think so. I just think it was a lapse in concentration that sort of allowed the opportunity, and we got punished for not being 100% switched on.
Yeah, and in terms of the other selection, then obviously Heather Payne withdrawn very, very late on in the warm-up. There's no real discussion here. Any team that brings Anya O'Gorman into it is going to be stronger, or as strong as what came out of it. She's been an institution in the Irish team, arguably at right back, which I would argue isn't her best position, but she has been solid whenever she's been called upon to play in that. Didn't really affect the game that much, I would imagine.
No, and she almost gifted Canada a massive chance early on when she slipped as well. Interesting enough for you, I don't know, you probably are aware of this. First League of Ireland player to start at a World Cup game for Ireland as well. Massive achievement, especially considering she retired and then come back in 2020. Massive servant for Ireland. She's over here. Our son's birthday was the other day. She missed her son's first birthday being at the World Cup, and she talked about, when I spoke to her the other day, she talked a little bit about that, and you could see the pride and how much it means for her to represent Ireland, especially considering she's been through a lot of the dark days where things weren't going well and things were poor. So for Anya, it was great to see. I was delighted for her as much as it was good for Heather, but like, it was always going to be difficult to ask for Anya to come into this sort of game and really have a massive impact. I think she played one great ball to Lucy Quinn in the first half, where Ireland had a great chance, but it just didn't work when the delivery came from Quinn into the keeper. Sort of got it. It's actually in the build up to the goal as well, when Lucy Quinn played the low ball across, and the keeper just got there ahead of Kerry Caruso.
No, Caruso got a touch on that. You might not have seen it. Caruso got a touch into the keeper, and then kicked it back off the keeper out for the corner.
Like, I didn't see the replay, but like that, you know, that's the ball she played, and it was quick play, and like, she done okay. Anya did. It's always going to be difficult for Anya to come into this game having not played in the other games, and coming in last minute where she's not training to be a starter. So, like, you can only say she gave it her best shot. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you. I thought she was excellent. But like I was saying, I didn't think she had a bad game at all by any stretch. In terms of the other changes, then as we talked through, of course, Sinead Farrelly kept her place on the side.
I thought she was brilliant.
I thought she was excellent.
First half,
she faded in the second half, but the first 60 minutes she was excellent. But then fitness has always been a bit of a question mark because she's only really back in the game the last 3 months. The story that she has just coming into this World Cup is phenomenal. We haven't really touched on it in any great depth on the show, but there is a podcast out there that's worth checking out.
Counter-attack by Breifne Earley.
Yeah, repeat that there because I spoke over you.
Counter-attack by Breifne Earley.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal story of which does at the end of it bring the whole Vera Pauw thing into discussion as well, but we'll talk about that at some other point. You're at the World Cup, you need accreditation for the games, so we're not gonna step on any eggshells out there at the moment. But in terms of Farrelly, I thought she was excellent on the ball. I thought she just really got involved. We did see the changes from Canada at halftime, and really that just looked to lift it up a gear. And you look at the quality of these players they're bringing in. Like, these girls are established internationals, 10 plus years experience. The likes of Christine Sinclair coming in and with 190 international goals in over 300 appearances. And that's the substitute you're calling on to come in and try and rescue a game for the Olympic champions. Like, could only dream to have a player with that experience and that quality to go into a side.
Yeah, I think someone said the amount of caps that they'd actually brought on was staggering. And
well, Sophie Schmidt played against Ireland in 2013 or 2014 when we played them the last time. March 2014.
2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, it's staggering when the amount of the type of players they can bring off the bench and really affect the game. Like, you look at it, like Bev Priestman was taking no prisoners at halftime, triple sub. Like, that showed that she was annoyed, she was frustrated with the first half performance, and like, she really wanted to go at Ireland. She thought they did a bit of an emphasis, and like, that's the sign of a coach who wants to go and win when they go and make them sort of changes. Like, for me, what's frustrating from an Ireland viewpoint is that there's the fact that by the 65th minute we had made all 5 changes, but we're still playing 5 at the back. It's the last 5 minutes that we're making a swap. What's the point of bringing Izzy Atkinson on a left wing back if you're not going to swap to a 4 or to left full? There's absolutely zero point if you're not going to swap to a 4, because you've just got her and Katie sort of mixing image here, and that was probably the most frustrating thing. Like, another thing that annoyed me was the fact how many throw-ins did Ireland give away where we literally threw the ball to them or things like that, and sloppy playing the ball out of play when no one near you. Like, there's things like that were frustrating, were annoying, and it's the basics at times that do let Ireland down. Yes, the conditions weren't great, but you should be doing the basics.
Talk to me about the I suppose the way we finished up and the personnel changes. You mentioned all 5 subs happened well before the end of the game, 65 minutes in, and they were fairly like for the most part. Like, we're bringing on players up front. I can't remember who
Amber
replaced.
Barrett.
Amber Barrett came on for Carusa. Barrett didn't really get into the game. There wasn't really much opportunity for her to really show what she's
There was
capable
one
of.
time where Marissa Shiva played an absolute peach of a pass to her, and it just went through the side of her body, and you were sort of like, oh, no, that's the chance. And
Yeah,
it was one that you were sort of like, she had to control that. But you're right, she didn't get into the game. You could see how frustrated she was. She sort of was. Even post game, when the game ended, the Ireland team were going into a huddle. She's standing a couple of yards off it, sort of annoyed, frustrated with things. And this level, you can't afford it.
your thoughts on Carusa? She impressed me throughout the entire 65 minutes she was on the pitch. Had a chance as well, but it was just a little bit too high for her.
I was critical of her the other day. I was extremely critical of her the other day. I thought she was piss poor against Australia for me. I thought, but I thought she was very good today. She was effective. She was a lot more further forward. She was pressing and trying to cause mistakes from the goalkeeper and stuff like that as well. And for me, it was a good, solid display from her. I didn't think Denise O'Sullivan was great for Ireland, if I'm being honest. And there was a couple of players for Ireland who sort of you would have liked to see compliment and add a little bit more of a blend to her and sort of, give the emphasis, give more of an attacking threat when it was possible. I think Caruso just probably ran out of legs at the end.
How much of, and you're correct in your assessment, I believe, that O'Sullivan wasn't really in the game, but how much of that is down to the position she's asked to play and the style of football we're asked to employ? I don't necessarily feel it's her fault. If the ball's going over her head like a tennis match, there's very little impact Denise O'Sullivan's going to have from the sixth position.
A lot of it probably. It's probably fair to say quite a lot of it is down to position, but it's the same thing that I said to you the other day, Breifne, is that we've got some quality players. We don't utilize them properly, and if you're not going to utilize them properly, how do you expect them to be in the game and sort of contributing to the way they're capable of contributing and things like that? And I didn't think you're probably right in saying that the way it was played sort of didn't suit Denise O'Sullivan. You could see she tried to get into it a little bit, but she just couldn't get into it, and probably no fault of her own.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think it's the role she's assigned isn't suitable for a player of her talent. You have to remember she is one of the key players for the top side in the NWSL, and like we're not utilizing them at all. And I was writing a bit this morning just for an article I'm putting together on the World Cup campaign as a whole, and I look at the players. We're not dealing with like for like here. We're so used to analysing Irish teams, and we insert all the men's players into the scenario, back to Trapattoni's era, to O'Neill's era, even to a certain extent now in the later part of the Stephen Kenny era, where it's not great football to watch because we believe we don't have the players. We're ranked 53rd in the world in the men's game. We're 22nd in the women's game. You look through our squad, every single player in that squad is competing either at the top end of the American League. We've 3 American-based players, all in the top, I think, 3 teams based on the league position at the moment. It's definitely top 4. We have players at Arsenal. Katie McCabe, minutes shy of a Champions League final spot last year. Very unlucky not to make it. Players with nearly every other Premiership, that's me putting the men's side of things. WSL clubs, I think nearly every club has Irish representation right the way down the division, apart from maybe the Man Cities and the Chelseas. But when you go to the 4th, 5th, and 6th, the whole way down the league, we have Irish players. The top 3 teams in the next tier down, Chloe Mustaki's at Bristol. They won the championship this year. There's a big glut of them at Birmingham. Jamie Finn, Louise Quinn, Harriet Scott, and Lucy Quinn are all in that squad. And then even at London City Lionesses, we've got Ciara Caruso and Lily Agg. In Scotland, we've teams at with players at the top end in Scotland, with players with Shamrock Rovers challenging for a title here in Ireland as well. And even the players who didn't make the cut, the likes of, I know we talked about her as she was a pundit on Australian TV the other evening for the game, Deborah Ann Della Hart played in the friendly against China earlier in the year. She won the league in Australia with Sydney, a key player. She's moved to Denmark in the last month. Like, we have a pool of players, and that's before I even include those that are out of favour, the Leanne Kiernans of this world, the Tyler Toland, who's qualified for the Champions League in Spain with Levante. We have probably 25, 30, 40 players who are playing at a decent level. Niamh Farrelly's in Italy as well. Like there's plenty of names who didn't make the flight or weren't even in the discussion for the flight We have quality players. Why are we playing crap football?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'm going to pick up
Right,
on
rant
first.
over, rant over.
All right, I agree with you. The style is shy. I don't mean
Language, please. Like,
sorry, apologies. And I don't normally say things like that in terms of the way like that, but the style is poor. It's extremely poor. There's a couple of things here off the back of this World Cup. A, it's time for the FAI to get their ducks in order in terms of the development of football, the structures going up from under 17s, under 19s, and senior. We need to start qualifying regularly for major tournaments in underage football. We need to be competing with the Englands. We need to be competing with these sort of sides in order for us to make it sustainable to be qualifying for senior tournaments constantly. The only way that we have a massive growth in Irish football is if we're constantly qualifying for senior tournaments. Yes, the problem is at the minute that may mean the gap between the National League and the senior team gets even bigger. But that's where it's really important that the FAI don't allow that, because women's football is completely different to the men's. And I think there's a massive opportunity for them off the back of this to sort of close that gap a little bit more. I think the most important thing is there's a legacy off this World Cup, that there's a legacy in terms of what happens next. We can't just say, oh, give the players a pat on the back, well done, you've done great in Australia, you represented the country. No, we need to see sustainability off the back of this. We need to see growth off the back of it. We need to see, we're not going to see of the level of the likes of what England had a couple of years ago, but we need to see some sort of growth. We need to see some sort of movement and some sort of push on, because the problem is or if we don't, there's a potential that the football in Ireland gets left behind. Gets left behind in Europe, gets left behind with other sports as well in Ireland.
I think the reality also is this squad is not the future of Irish football, and I say that with the height of respect. I know a lot of these girls personally. I have a lot of time. They're probably among the people I respect on the planet most. Some of these players, the work they've put in for little to no reward financially or credit-wise. It's great to see the likes of LOIWomen getting in on a World Cup final, because she has soldiered for 2 decades, and I had a very small crossing with her for a couple of seasons in her college days. She was always the first to training. She was always the last to leave. She was always the one to pick up and bring the bibs, balls, and cones out to training or back into the dressing room. She was the absolute professional. Herself, Stephanie Roach, a couple of others that came through those squads that I had back in the mid-noughties. Katie Taylor was one of that team as well. And the attitude they applied themselves to is the reason why they are where they are now in the game. And I think they deserve, Anya absolutely deserve to play from a credit worked up basis alone, never mind the talent that she obviously has.
No, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to call bullshit. This credit built up doesn't wash with me. She played because she deserved to play.
100%.
100%. For me, the thing is, this credit built up with Ireland has to stop. You're either there because you're good enough.
Yeah,
that's it. You're there because you're good enough. You're not there because you were there years ago. And I think that's a problem with Ireland, with Irish football, that we've too much of that. We've had too much of that for many years. We need to now have it that you're on form at your club, you're playing well, you deserve to be there.
The actual point I was trying to get to, and I completely agree with you. You're absolutely right. And LOIWomen is there on merit. I'd have had her in the attacking element of the squad, but that's a different story. Who is the youngest Irish player that started the game tonight?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's going to take me a second.
And I know because I checked.
It's probably Katie.
Nope, not Katie McCabe.
The only other one I could think of potentially is
She's 2 younger than Katie McCabe. And when I say younger, actually, apologies. It is Katie McCabe. Katie McCabe is the youngest. The order's
Katie's what, 26, 27?
She's 27. She is 2 months younger than Courtney Brosnan and Ciara Caruso, who are within days of each other in November '95. And the reality is these players are not the future for Ireland. As I said, the next World Cup, the youngest player who took the field today will be 31 years of age. So if we are to qualify for a next World Cup, we don't have that experience coming behind who've now had the opportunity to go to a World Cup, and that's a problem for me. We look at the players in the squad who are younger than Katie McCabe. Amber Barrett came on, fair enough. Apologies, Megan Connolly is younger. She's 97.
She's not much.
She's
Connolly's
26.
not much younger.
Yeah, she's 26. She's only a bit younger. Marissa Shiva, Heather Payne, Izzy Atkinson, and Abby Larkin. There's only 3 players in the entire squad under 23. So if this squad were to carry forward for 4 years, there'd only be 3 of them under 30.
I'm going to ask you a question now, and I'm going to sound controversial there. Have we missed a generation of underage players? Because if you look at the recent number of years, how many of the underage players from the 19s are in the senior squad? There's a lot of them who have sort of gone off different pathways, the likes of the Chloe Singleton generation. We've missed that nearly entire generation. There's no player from that sort of pathway window in the squad from that sort of last couple of years. Like you look at Abby was still under 17s last year. There's been a massive generation where the last couple of years we haven't had the underage players started.
What do you put that down to? Is that a reluctance of the management to give them the opportunity?
Potentially, doesn't rate them, doesn't like for me. It's a difficult one because what do you put it actually down to? Is it a tough one? Is it they're not good enough? Because we've seen some players who have definitely been good enough. We've seen players who've represented us at underage who have definitely been good enough, and like it's something that maybe we need that under 23s team. We need that opportunity to have the players to have the next step on, to actually be able to go somewhere after under 19s, not go on play Gaelic football, not go and drop out of soccer because they feel there's no future for them at an international level. And I think that's important as well too, is that we have a further pathway, because I think the step from 19 to senior, we're losing too many players at Ireland, and we can't afford to be doing that. Especially as you say, the next generation. Like the next generation now, you're looking at the likes of your Jesse Stapletons, who are just about finished under 19, who's finished under 19s now. Like that sort of player is crying out for an under 23s until the likes of Avira says, okay, I'm ready, you're ready. Although some might say she should be in the squad now, but like I just think there's a lot that needs to be done, and that's why I think the legacy from the World Cup is even more important. That we have a lot more in place.
The World University Games platform is the perfect opportunity for that. Guaranteed a major finals every 2 years. It's not. I think it's no longer the World University Games. It's the World University Championships or World Cup at university level.
I'm going to burst a bubble here. I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. Because the amount of players that are not going to university now after finishing of the top level players is actually increasing. Especially for players who are maybe looking to go abroad, go to Scotland, go somewhere, go to England. They're not going to college, so they wouldn't be eligible for that. So then you're looking at only a select number would be. I agree.
But the ones you're talking about are in a professional environment. They're going to develop in that professional game. So
but they still need an international pathway as well for me.
Well, I disagree to a certain extent, because if you look at the players that you're talking about that left Ireland pre-graduation effectively straight from school, you're looking at Izzy Atkinson, you're looking at Abby Larkin, potentially could make that step in the next little while. Emily Whelan, well, actually I hadn't thought of Emily, to be fair, but these players go into a professional environment. I'm talking about the next crop beneath them. You've got a bunch of maybe 25 players coming through. The requirements academically are not huge. Like, you could register for you just have to be in education. So you could, in theory, be doing a full-time night course in education while you're playing football. If you wanted to be involved in that, it wouldn't be the most difficult thing in the world. You'd have to obviously go to college, but you can work the requirements for that. Certain players who would have been in PLC courses and the like would have been eligible in the past. So depending on what course you do.
Billy Cleary won't like me saying this. The college system in Ireland does nothing for the women's game at the minute, and it's not fully down to colleges. There is so much potential for the college league to be brilliant and be great again.
Yeah, but I was involved in the colleges world 10, 15 years ago, and we had an interprovincial competition, which has been done away with now because the National League won't release players. But essentially, it was one weekend with the best players, and half of these girls played in it. You look at a certain age profile. I think 5 of those girls played for me with Leinster in that competition. I know Denise O'Sullivan played with Munster, and plenty more played in that competition as they came through college. Niamh Fahey would have been involved as well when she was at Galway during her time there. So it was a really good National League opportunity to see these players up against quality opposition. We see it week in, week out in the National League now, but I think there's an opportunity there for a combined effort between the powers that be. So you're talking about the FAI, the IFA, of course, have to be involved as well because it's an all-island team, and what's now Student Sport Ireland. They need to sit down and really push this forward, but it needs to be funded. And unfortunately, there's no funding in the university sector for this, but there is funding, and there needs to be made funding both sides of the border and really buy in. We saw what they can do when they get together for the Avenir Cup. I think that's a huge first step towards both working together in a women's football world that we haven't seen previously. But there needs to be a program put in place for both organizations, North and South.
100%. But the problem is that's where the legacy of the likes of this World Cup has that opportunity. It's if the right people want to get involved and actually go and say, yes, let's go and do something. Let's go and change football.
Where do you go from here? If you were in charge of the FAI and you had the decision making power to move the dial and change how we're operating, what are the first maybe 3 things you would do over the next 12 months to put us in the right direction, in your opinion?
I'd be making first and foremost, I'd be making sure the Women's National League is sustainable. If you want a professional league, we need to go and make sure it's sustainable. Are we running clubs right? How are we running things? What sort of off the field, on the field? How are we maximising the clubs? Secondly, I would be going and getting the structure with the colleges, because I think the colleges' scholarships are the way forward. If it's a link, if it's something similar to the underage structure where we've seen the likes of Kevin's and stuff like that, having to have links with the likes of Bowes, the clubs like that, maybe that's the way to go, because I think we need to have a strong foundation. Everybody talks about the National League having a second and third division. We're not ready for it. We're not ready for it because of the player pool and things like that. We need to go in the next couple of years and make sure we keep our best players here. We don't just lose our best players every season to go to England, going somewhere else. A lot of them are going for peanuts as well. That's the worst thing.
Well, I was going to say that money talks, but there's not a whole pile of money in the grand scheme of things. No. When you look at a top line figure now, I realize I'm being very, very crude here, but a top line figure in the 50 million range for the FAI turnover for a year, and we're talking about girls going to England in some cases for probably less than they'd get on social welfare in this country. And that's before they pay their expenses, move away from home, and all of the things that go with being an elite athlete, travel and all of the other things. Surely we can come up with a plan somehow to keep these girls in the league, even if it's a centralized contract system for national team players. There has to be a way, surely.
Government support is the only way that the National League is sustainable, the National League is growing. We've seen Minister Byrne, Thomas Byrne was at the first World Cup game. The only way we get sustainability, and the thing is, I'm not going to dump it on the FAI and say the FAI need to come up with a load of money. No, all stakeholders in Irish football, whether that be better sponsorship, better endorsements, the whole lot is the only way we grow. Is if we've a massive come together. They had a strategic plan for the women. I think we need a new one where we actually have achievable goals. Don't just go and have some goals that are way out there and we think, oh, we might be able to get them. No, we need to have goals that these are specific. Like, we've had debates over things like the cup final being in the Aviva compared to Tala, like things like that. For me, women's football only grows when we start selling out Tala, even for cup finals and things like that. That's when we know women's football has grown. Attendances for some clubs are shit at the minute. They're poor, and the problem is Breifne, is that we need to make sure we do it right across the board. It's not just always about international football, because international football will always be the bread and butter for the FAI. But for the others who aren't quite at that level, the domestic leagues is where is their baby. And I just think we have such an opportunity here. Like, this is why I don't want to be overly critical of Ireland in terms of the World Cup, because there's so many positives to take out of the World Cup. And so many avenues for growth as well. And like, my overall emotion today is I'm extremely disappointed and probably a little bit emotional in terms of how I'm speaking, because of following this team for years. Like, remembering the times when you're in the press box and it's empty, to now sitting in the stadium in Perth, 20,000 kilometers away, dejected that Ireland are out of a World Cup. But I really do believe that this is only the start of the growth of women's football in Ireland.
No, 100%. And I was listening on another platform. I think it was Joe, possibly Stephanie Roach was interviewed on the football show there before the World Cup. But I only listened to it the last couple of days. She talked about an international friendly where she remembered going along as a kid and watching Olivia O'Toole play against, I think it was Italy or Switzerland, I can't remember which, in Richmond Park. And I remember being at the game, bumping into a few people I knew from other clubs, but you could nearly name every single person who was in the ground. You knew whose parents they were, or whose boyfriend it was, or whose neighbor it was, or whose coach it was. Everybody knew everybody in the stand. And that's not that long ago. That's about 2006, 2005, 2007 kind of generation. And here we are, less than 2 decades later, with an Irish team at a World Cup. It's phenomenal. And I know, it's disappointing to be out after 2 games, but I think as much as I'm disappointed, and maybe the strategy wouldn't have been the one I would have approached coming into the games in terms of player selection, in terms of approach to certain games and certain situations within games, but I think we have to realize that we're at a World Cup, and that's a huge stepping stone, but it really needs to be a platform that we move from now. This is the bar. This is the minimum acceptable level, and everything after this has to be upwards. And I think we're capable of that. I think we've underperformed as a sport for definitely for 15, 16 years. I think we could have been at major championships before, and we've missed out. A bit of unluckiness, maybe a bit of poor decision making by players or by coaches have hampered us along the way. But I think this has to be the minimum now, and I think I'm excited to see what the FAI do if they embrace this, and when we come back and push it on to the next level. Speaking of the future, obviously Nigeria to come next week. We'll talk about that just maybe to finish the show. But before we do, as we move into the future, Vera Pauw, there's a question mark over her contract. There's a question mark over her, I suppose, I don't want to say credibility, that's not the right word, but her suitability for the role, given what we found out in the last 6 to 8 months from December, the report that was issued in December, and she was named in that report. What's your thoughts on where the FAI, I don't want to get into the details of that, but what's the thoughts of where we go to from here? Do we sit down with Vera Pauw and offer her a contract? Do we cut our losses and look elsewhere for a coach to push this on to another level potentially?
Well, the talk was that contract talks were put on hold pre-World Cup when the article from The Athletic came out. So it's interesting to see what happens. I'm not convinced at the minute that she will get a new contract. I think she may see out the Nigeria game. That could be her last game. I do suspect that we may see a bit of movement on that in terms of not long after the Nigeria game. There could be one announcement one way or another. The problem is the Nations League comes up quite quickly with the games against Northern Ireland and Hungary in late September. So it's only really a month between a month and 6 weeks between the games. So I'm not sure. I would say the FAI are going to take a bit of time to probably reassess everything, discuss everything. Like I was talking to a couple of people in terms of the report that she was named on in the NWSL. I think some of the things on it, I'm not going to get into detail on it. I think the way she was named in it doesn't sit right with me, the way the report was framed as well, because there was people who potentially had committed potential criminal offences named, and then she's sandwiched in the middle, where maybe it's a strange report. I do think the FAI, before they make any sort of decision, they have to have a full due diligence, maybe an independent, speak to the players as well. But I'm not convinced she gets a new contract, if I'm being honest.
I suppose my question is, from the FAI's point of view, do they have a case to answer in terms of how quickly they came out to back her when that report broke pre-Christmas, and now when it was repeated? Because there's no new information really, let's be honest, from December right through to the week or two before the team left Belfield. Do the FAI have a case to answer for what they did or didn't do between, say, December and July?
Potentially. That's a fair question to ask. You'd like to know what exactly they did do, who did they speak to, what players did they speak to, because when you listen to Katie doing the press conference before the French game, her answer she didn't back Vera fully when was asked, can she speak for the entire players? So you'd like to know what due diligence was done, what sort of things were done, and what questions were asked. Only the FAI know that exact answer, and I can't tell you with certainty that certain players were asked or who was asked. I assume the leadership group was asked, and that was it.
Yeah, I think my own personal take on it is it's an unfortunate situation for everybody, for Vera, for the FAI, for the players. It's been horrible. I would imagine for people on all sides of the equation within the FAI.
It's definitely impacted the World Cup, though.
Yeah, 100%.
No doubt about it.
But I also think it's an opportunity maybe for everybody to just cut ties and say, we've got this far, we've pushed it on a level. You're going to go your direction, we're going to go our direction. And I think ultimately, that's probably what's going to be best for the squad, for the game, and for the sport, and probably for both parties. I think there's a slight tarnish, rightly or wrongly, on Vera's legacy with the FAI based on that. But I think if she walks away now, she will always be that Jack Charlton for the female side, the manager who got them to a World Cup final for the first time, led them into that, and absolutely covered themselves, despite the results and what they say on paper, covered themselves in probably 20 minutes on in the first game and 45 at least, if not more, minutes today in two of the best performances we've seen from Irish teams in quite some time.
Listen, she deserves massive credit for actually a lot of the work that she has done with Ireland, and there's no doubt about that. And you're right, like the last 20 minutes against Australia were great, and then the first 45 today. But she does deserve an awful lot of credit. And the question you'd have to ask is, has she built up enough credit in the bank to maybe get that other contract? When she was talking about wanting it done before the World Cup and it's not being done, that's when it sort of leads me to think that it may not be done in the end, and we could see the last of Vera Pauw against Nigeria on Monday.
Yeah, well, listen, football's a funny old game as well, and free agents in football tend to get very attractive when football associations and clubs are looking for replacements, and she has delivered. Ireland have been impressive at the World Cup, and I think there will be interest in her. She will have opportunities if the FAI choose not to, or maybe she chooses herself not to renew a contract for the position. Let's talk Nigeria, because that's probably the last thing on the agenda today. Really, Nigeria are the opponents. We play them Monday mid-morning, 11 o'clock I think is the kickoff Irish time. It's in Brisbane, back in the heat. It's been their base, so at least they're familiar with the surroundings, they're familiar with the city. They'll be used hopefully to the heat a little bit. But
they're flying back tonight, so they're not even staying the night in Perth. They're going back tonight.
What's the strategy? What's the strategy, Aaron? Do you play a completely changed team and go, we're out of the competition, we'll give the girls who haven't got minutes yet, put one goalkeeper in first half, second goalkeeper in second half, and or do you just maybe give them a couple of minutes as a token, or do you just go out to win the game? What none of them really matter, and it's down to personal preference, really. What's your thoughts?
I'd love to see 7 or 8 changes and let some players have an opportunity. I'd love to see that. I don't think it'll happen.
No, I don't think so either. And again, I'd be on the same side of the fence as you. Give everybody at least 45 minutes that they go home from the World Cup having played. It's soul destroying to see people. But
then again, it's an opportunity to win a game in the World Cup. That's the other side of it. It's an opportunity, and the thing is, Nigeria play Australia tomorrow. Mary Fowler's also out of the game, as well as Sam Kerr, and I can't think of the other player as well. Two of them have concussion, so Nigeria get a result against Australia, with Australia missing a couple that could come into the Ireland game, where a win could see them into the last 16. So there's a lot of different conundrums there as well. Whereas if they lose, they're massively on the back foot. So I don't know. It all depends how Nigeria are going to approach it as well. And I would like to see her do that, but I really can't see Vera Pauw making many changes.
Yeah, in terms of past the Nigeria game, we talked about the age profile of the squad. There's a few players there in the mid to, well, I won't say late 30s, but definitely in the mid 30s there. There's probably a core of 5 or 6 of them. Nifahi, LOIWomen, Dan Caldwell, Rush Littlejohn, Louise Quinn, all be over the age of 37 the next time the World Cup comes around, as will Sinead Farrelly. Will we see Sinead Farrelly again in an Ireland jersey? Is this just the kind of the full stop to her international career, or could we see her maybe take part for European Championships? Will the interest level be there from her?
I honestly think we see Sinead Farrelly back. Everything that she's saying, I think we see Sinead Farrelly back. I have a feeling that we'll see her for another campaign. I hope we do. I'd be extremely disappointed if we don't. But everything she's talking about is positive in terms of playing for Ireland, learning the national anthem, making sure that she embraces absolutely everything of it. Like, funny enough, I don't know if you know this, but her sister actually lives in Dublin. Not in Dublin. Her sister lives in, I think it's Westmeath. Her sister only moved to Ireland recently. I think it's Meath or Westmeath. She was talking about when her sister spent the weekend with her sister and me in down that sort of region when Ireland had a weekend off in after before the between the Zambia and France that weekend. She was talking about that, and it was amazing to hear that she's really immersing herself in the Irish culture. So I really think we will see her again.
Excellent. I think she's a player with immense ability, and I think the fact that she hasn't really kicked the ball in 6 years really means she's probably closer to the body of a 27-year-old in terms of the wear and tear. So hopefully, we will see her for another campaign afterwards. The others care to comment? Anya Gorman's already retired once.
I don't know. We could see a couple of retirements. I don't know whether it could be a case of a manager says to the players, "Listen, I want to try other players," then the players retire. Like Dan Caldwell is close to 100 caps. You'd be disappointed if she didn't get to 100. I think she's on 96. I don't know. It's a difficult one to say if we see players retiring or whether it's a manager turned around and said, "Listen, I want to go different." I think it might be that a manager turned around and say, "I want to go a different way."
Interesting times ahead for a lot of people around that Ireland squad, management and players alike. What's the feeling? I know you probably haven't had a chance to really catch up with the supporters, but the atmosphere in the stadium afterwards, was it one of pride or was it one of disappointment or a little bit of both?
I think it was one of pride, because you could hear them singing the players off the pitch and things like that. The Irish fans never stopped. They've been brilliant this World Cup so far. I expect another massive crowd in Brisbane again on Monday. A lot of Irish fans over that East Coast, and I'd expect it to be another packed occasion where they'll sing the players on for 90 minutes.
Yeah, here's hoping we can restore a little bit of pride. Well, we haven't lost any pride, but even just bump that up into the last game of the group. It's meaningless in terms of competitiveness, in terms of getting out of the group. We can't do that mathematically. We are eliminated from the World Cup. Borderline disappointment on that. But it's so proud for anyone who's been involved in the game over the last, at any point, if you're only involved a month or if you're involved a decade or two or more, people deserve huge respect for helping whatever little bit of an impact they've had along the way, whether it was been part of that first team with Linda Gorman and others, right through to the Olivia O'Toole's, into everybody who's come along the way. I suppose the goal from Stephanie Roach, I know she's a former co-host of this show herself. She's moved on to bigger and better things, obviously, with RTE, but it's great to see the impact that each of these players made in their own little way, pushed it on a step, and to see it get to a World Cup now. And we've broken our duck. We're no longer going to be the debutants at these competitions. We're going to be coming with a game plan to try and get out of groups and compete, and I think that's well within our capabilities over the next few months. Aaron, what's next for you? What are you getting yourself up to for the next 4 or 5 days loose in Australia?
So I'm flying back across the country tomorrow. I'm back in Brisbane tomorrow evening. A couple day or two of chill, then back at the media Saturday, speaking to Ireland players ahead of the game on Monday, and it's all going to blaze. And actually, I'm going to Brazil and France as well on Saturday evening. I have media accreditation for Brazil and France as well, so I'm looking forward to that. Going to see Martin play as well, so really excited. Looking at another week another 10 days in Australia, 10 days or so in Australia. Going to make the most of it and enjoy myself.
Excellent. We're looking forward to having you back, so that I'm not jealous of you anymore. But listen, it's been a great journey for the Irish girls as they try to get through that group. It hasn't proven to be successful for them in terms of results, but they really have restored the pride across the entire nation watching them over the last 2 weeks. Aaron, thanks again for being so generous with your time immediately after the game. They're in Perth in the Rectangular Stadium, which is the most bizarre name for a stadium.
It's the new naming right. It's the HBF Stadium is the proper name for it. It's the Perth Glory Stadium.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of the Aviva being the Dublin Arena for any big games, with the sponsorship issues here in Europe as well. Aaron, listen, we'll chat to you before the Brisbane game, the Nigeria game next week, but enjoy the couple of days and safe travels.
I will do.